Good luck editing this one, Clayton.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG podcast. I am Clayton.
I'm Jordan.
And I'm Eliot.
Before we get started, I would like to remind our listeners that you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. Episodes are available on most podcatchers, and episodes are also available on YouTube at the channel Alien Familiar Media. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com, and we are on Facebook at facebook.com/alienfamiliar. Thank you for joining us today. I don't know if you noticed, but the little intro that I splice in is a little bit different because I have started to upload episodes of the podcast to YouTube to basically store them there and to give an additional venue for people to listen to the podcast. Thank you very much, Jordan, for the suggestion. Beginning at the start of May, one episode a day will be uploaded to YouTube in an attempt to kind of optimize the algorithm that favors frequent posting. So one episode a day will start coming out May 1st. And at that rate, November 1st should be the beginning of November should be the first episode that drops simultaneously of a podcast on podcatchers and also on YouTube. So over the next couple of months, we'll be making episodes of the podcast available there. So that's all I really wanted to say about that. Today we are going to be talking a little bit about deception, particularly talking about when the DM is deceiving the players. And this came about because of a session that we had at the beginning of April. Some might even call this our April Fool's session, even though it wasn't on April 1st in Jordan's game. Jordan, you want to tell us a little bit about what you subjected us to on at the beginning of April?
Yeah. Okay, so by way of background, the group has been working their way through the Palace of the Vampire Queen. So that's what they're expecting. You know, they're in this, macabre, gothic tomb kind of setting. And April Fool's Day was just a few days prior to this session. And I thought that it's just close enough to merit, playing a joke, and far enough away that it would catch them by surprise. And so, since the theme of this campaign has been exploring the earliest modules and adventures that were ever published for OD&D so far, I decided that I would drop in something that, due to the context of the setting being in Blackmore, I really didn't have a good place to drop in this thing. But what I reached for was this adventure called the Tomb of Rahotep. This was an adventure that was created prior to the Tomb of Horrors ever coming out. The name of the person who created it has slipped my mind, but we're going to put that in the show notes to give him due credit because he deserves it. But anyway, it's tomb crawl, like pyramid crawl kind of thing. All sort of Egyptian themed as you would expect. But it's absolutely just a murder pit. There's all kinds of high level monsters that you'd have to deal with, traps that just really aren't fair. All of the terrible things that you classically hear about from Tomb of Horrors that was kind of spawned in this adventure that Gary Gygax expanded upon and did a lot of interesting original things himself to ultimately run at Origins, if I'm not mistaken. So anyway, the group was in the Palace of the Vampire Queen. They come across this weird little chest with a Ankh-shaped mirror in it, and Eliot almost fucked it all up and got very nervous and decided he was going to stuff it in his pack, and that would have completely derailed my whole plan. But luckily, our friend Ed, being a curious cleric of Farlangen, decided that he wanted to take a look at it and looked in the mirror. The group then is transported to this weird hall, this tomb corridor, where behind them is just a floor-to-ceiling mirror blocking any exit, and then a weird door forward. So they go exploring. They figure out a few things from hieroglyphs and all that, and then the very first encounter in the Tomb of Rahotep, you awaken a aerial servant, which is a sort of an air elemental kind of thing that is programmed by whatever wizard summoned them to protect a certain area. This thing's invisible. This thing is a beast, and the group basically immediately just started getting mauled. We haven't had a party death in some time, and so I imagine it was pretty jarring when people started dropping like flies. And I really thought they were going to get through that first one and get into some of the cruel traps, but in fact they did not. We had a TPK and just right there in that first corridor. And then at the end of the session, I say that everybody kind of snaps to in the room where they picked the mirror up, and everybody was fine. They were just as they were when they picked up the mirror in the first place. And April Fools, haha, no one's dead. So that was the adventure. I don't know how well it was received. I got called many terrible names from some players, but I think others probably enjoyed it. But yeah, that was the long and short of it, I guess.
So suffice it to say, we will not be doing a post-mortem of that because we had our shit pushed in the very first encounter, and Jordan really undersold how quickly we realized we were being put against the wall, because Chris's character is our main tank for the group. He very rarely goes down, and he is able to take a lot of punishment. And in the first round of combat against this thing, he was knocked for a loop, and I don't remember if he actually went down the first round or if he just got very severely injured. But in that very first round, we knew shit was getting real.
Yeah, and I ran it by the book too. I wasn't just trying to like fuck you guys over with some kind of like simulated bullshit. I ran the creature as statted out and did everything by the numbers. But yeah, you guys are not ready for aerial servants yet.
Yeah, and my character ended up killing half of the party himself whenever he tried to place a fireball. And I did my best to warn everyone to run back because I was about to do something very dangerous, and there was one person who was down and dying. And I said what I was going to be doing. Well, I didn't say exactly what I was going to be doing. I just gave a warning that you all want to get back much further. And then a couple people decided to be heroes and rushed forward to try to save their companion right before I set off the fireball. So that was a lot of fun. I felt incredibly bad, even though I warned them and said that incoming. And still, it's rough. It's bad enough when a player character dies. It's even worse when a player character dies from friendly fire.
I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed I think that I liked it because it was realistic. I didn't think it was a joke. We've been through enough of these weird-ass old modules to know that it's just perfectly possible that somebody put a lull room. And so I was just content. I was proud of myself. There were people, who immediately turned to this is bullshit, man. Like, what the fuck are they? Why would they even design this? And it's just like, this is what we signed up for. So to hear it was to get the April Fool's Day joke was definitely a relief. But I was proud of myself for not conducting myself in any sort of losery way.
Yeah, I was feeling really bad, especially after several player characters went down by my character's hands. I was very, very relieved when it was revealed that the entire thing was all in our minds and we weren't actually there. And that's kind of why I wanted to talk about this, is because it touches on something that doesn't really happen a whole lot, I don't think, in games, where the DM actively does something to deceive the players. And there are some times when it is okay, and there are some times when it's probably not okay. I say probably because I'm sure that for most of the things we're going to talk about today, there are instances where, yeah, it not only is something that could happen. It probably is something that should happen. And so what I'm specifically talking about here, whenever the DM is deceiving the players, is when it is the DM themselves who is saying something to the players, and the players and the characters are taking it as the reality of the experience of the world in which the player characters are in. So this is something that it's a metagame aspect of deception that we're mostly going to be talking about, but we're also going to be getting into other areas where the DM will actively try to deceive the players. And I feel like since the DM is just the arbiter of reality, the deception, when it's done right, is usually just a part of this greater narrative that is happening in the game. We have had, I think we talked about this on a different episode, where we had the session in Eliot's game where not only was Eliot, but all the rest of the player characters except for Jordan were deceiving Jordan and his character about some shenanigans that were happening involving doppelgangers.
Yeah, I thought about that too, Clayton. That I think it's telling that two instances where a party member or the party was put in, just a completely deceived situation. We enjoyed it so much, or was intrigued enough that we kind of wanted to talk about it on the pod. That goes to the whole, it needs to be done. I think it's something that if you're running a long time campaign and you kind of got the basics under your belt, doing something like that, it's memorable, and it's one of those things that I think brings people to D&D. Like, I don't think anybody walked around after the game with Jordan, I hope, thinking, that sucked, I hated that was so dumb, or that was a waste of my time. I didn't feel like that at all. Jordan, did you get any of that kind of stuff?
For that doppelganger session, or the Tomb of Rahotep?
Oh, no, you're the tomb.
No, I don't think so. I think some people were salty and upset that they got tricked into thinking that their beloved character had died. But I think when it was all said and done, people were just relieved that they still had their characters.
I know I was.
Yeah, something I've heard other people on other podcasts and stuff say is like that even though this game we're playing is fake and it's all in our minds and stuff, like a lot of the emotions you feel in the time, they're real emotions. And like the sinking feeling of, oh my god, all of these characters are dying, my character is dying. That's just one of the reasons why I play the game, is to feel these in basically a safe space where there isn't really any repercussions, like in the same way that people go to amusement parks or people go to watch scary movies.
Yeah. By the way, the Tomb of Rahotep was written by a guy named Alan Lucian, just to circle back on that real quick. And that Tomb of Horrors that became was ran at Origins in 1975. And if anybody wants to find that, they can find it in a current publication called Art and Arcana that Wizards of the Coast put out. I believe Wizards put that out. Yeah, they for sure did. And it's got a lot of cool history, artwork, and stuff from D&D. But in the back, it's got this little section that's the original Tomb of Horrors, and appended to that is the original Tomb of Rahotep from Alan Lucian. So check that out if you want to see some really great D&D archaeological treasures. Anyway, yeah. As far as people being salty, yeah, I think people were happy that their characters were still alive and everything. I don't know how well that would have went if this group had not all been, at least to me, you guys some of you are still just getting to know each other, but each one of you to me are very close, like pretty old friends, some very old friends. But I don't know if this would have went over as well with a group of people that didn't know each other so well. What do y'all think? Clayton, would you ever pull something like this on your public library D&D group or anything? Or Eliot, on your group of new D&D players?
I would say that it definitely takes a certain degree of trust. between the players and the DM. And yes, now in my current library group game, yes, I would, but only because I've literally been playing with them for like almost a year and a half. I would not do this very early in our game where I didn't know the players and kind of how they react to things going bad. If you don't know how the players are going to react, I think you should hold off on doing this, because there are some players. Well, hell, there's a player in my or not in my at my table, but there is a player who plays with us, who plays with the other GM more often in my library game. And if that person was in my group, there is no way I would run something like that.
Yeah, same, Clayton. I don't think it has anything to do with. It blows my mind that there would be people who'd get too salty, but I think a lot of that is just from experience, and it kind of breaks the monotony. In my game, we did that very late in the game, and in your game, we're over a year and stuff. So yeah, I think that it's a nice little curveball after you've thrown a lot of other pitches.
Yeah, and trust is the biggest issue with it. There are some players who have been screwed over by DMs, and there are other players who have never really experienced a deception like that in a game. And I feel like if you want to work up to something like this, do some smaller things along the way to let the player know that, hey, this is a game in which the reality I am presenting to you is not always 100% what is actually happening in the world. And this is kind of a segue into like several of the different ways that I've spitballed as like ways of doing deception. These items that I have that we're going to talk about later in the episode, these aren't necessarily a ranked list of like do this escalation in order to get to the point where you can do this. I just have this as a list of things that a list of ways a DM can go about deceiving the players.
I have an interesting segue if we want to move to a different part of the conversation, because the game itself that Jordan ran was it was fun, but I think you hit the nail on the head by tying it to other forms of deception, because it could have affected it. Like, because I was thinking here about dice rolling and stuff, and if you're playing with a DM, or if you are a DM who's can be somewhat dishonest, if that's a theme in your game, I could see that going sideways really quick. Because if one of the things that made it work for Jordan was, Jordan's very consistent as a good DM should be, and I think we all feel a necessary form of anal clenching anytime we go into a nasty battle, and so just it has to come at it sideways. But if you're somebody who's frequently suspect, I guess, and this to me would go to other forms, like say if you're bad about weighting the game one way or the other towards your players through fudging dice and things like that, I could see that as being just another annoying thing for your players. Anybody have any other thoughts?
I want to come down hard here personally against fudging dice, and be very pro lying to your players. I think that it's important for the dungeon master to try to keep in mind the subjective experience of the character, the player character that they're describing things to that player of. You're not going to have a perfect perception of what's going on there, even though we play these like top down kind of maps, and like we get this like kind of feeling like we just know everything that's going on, and some games even let you know what the enemy's hit points are and things like that. I think that's a counter to immersion, and the more you can describe things as a DM in the way that particular player character might be perceiving it, and might even be like prejudicing it towards that, I think you're kind of helping the player be more immersed in what's going on. At the same time, the dice are the closest thing to an objective reality that we're going to have in an imaginary game, And therefore, I think that the dice results should be absolutely sacrosanct. That's the only thing that makes the game fair for people to play. Otherwise, it's just the DM, making up shit and telling the players what happens to their characters. That's just nonsense. So that's my 2 bits on that.
So just so I'm clear, you are kind of putting fudging dice rolls as being a form of deception that some DMs perpetrate against their players.
I don't even know if I'd call that. Well, I mean, you're lying to the player. You're not lying to the character, and that's the distinction that I'd like to make here. We're playing a game that assumes rules, and those rules you have to rely on to be able to make informed decisions about what you want to do. And if those rules aren't really how things work, then none of your decisions make any sense. They don't have any weight to them. There's no meaning. And so you may as well not even be doing it at all. So in order for there to be such a thing as player agency, there needs to be some objective arbiter of outcomes that nobody gets to fuck with. And that's what the dice are supposed to be. Now, telling your player characters that they have a hunch that this and this is such a way, or like this reminds them of something that they've seen before, that maybe it's not really like that thing, or a NPC, telling them something that turns out to be totally false. I think that's completely within bounds. But lying about game mechanics, that's just being a shitty person and a shitty DM, and I would walk away from any table where that was happening.
I mean, my experience, and I'd hope that you guys have had a different experience, but typically fudging dice rolls, when I have done it in the past, and when I've played in games where I figured out that was happening, it almost always was in the advantage of the overall party. And for that reason, I completely agree with you on this, Jordan, because when a dungeon master, for whatever reason, decides that, a roll is too harsh, or they'll fake a fail when they gotta succeed and things like that, the implications are, I mean, they're like, okay, so you didn't design it well in the first place because you feel like something didn't come off right and you need to nerf it so the game can be fair. Or if you just put story ahead of the overall game consistency rules wise, and you just say, I don't want this player to die today, or whatever, and you fudge that. Both of those things, I find that to be ultra annoying. The only thing that I could think of that would be worse is if I found out that my DM was fudging in their favor against the enemies. Have you guys had that happen? I would probably quit that fucking game if I figured it out. I can't imagine I would stay, because that would be awful.
I will admit that there have been some times that have happened in my games where, like, the big bad that the player characters were fighting, the player characters just fucking took him down before he was able to do anything. And, like, the last player to go before the big bad's turn managed to get the kill hit. I've given the big bad a few extra hit points just so that he could survive, just to do one hit before going down on the next character's action.
I think it's lame.
I mean, do you think there's any place, and not both of you, do you think there is any place where that kind of manipulation is appropriate, where to set a scene to make it particular? Now, I don't have any problem with planning ahead to break the rules. Like, if it's a part of your prep that this is going to be a scene that's of some import, and so you're just write it into your own personal prep that this particular character is going to do this particular thing that otherwise would not be realistic within game rules, but I want it to be a part of the story. I want it to be a meaningful moment in the scene. And so I've planned that, and I guess that's a form of deception as well. How do you guys fall down on that kind of thing?
I'm fine with giving an enemy some kind of power, or some kind of, item, or something to do with the environment that changes the normal rules, because we're dealing with magical shit, that there should be unlimited possibilities in that sense. And so I'm completely fine with something like that occurring. But this bit that Clayton's going for, and I think a lot of people would probably sympathize with where Clayton's at, where it's like, I just want to create an interesting experience for the player characters, and I put all this time into this big encounter and blah blah blah, and then the math just worked out so that the big bad just gets hosed in one round, and that's not enjoyable for anybody. Like, yeah, that's a case to be made, and I get it, but honestly, I feel like you're pulling at a thread there that's gonna undo the whole sweater.
I do agree with you, Jordan, that I have a sneaking suspicion that the growth in narrative games and the fudging of dice rolls is at the root of the progression of particularly D&D having the reputation of getting softer on the players as each edition comes down the line. I have a sneaking suspicion, and there's no way to verify this, that might be the core seed from which all of that grew in the editions of D&D.
Yeah, and our friend Steele, who is in my old school D&D game, he said something along the lines of, when it's so lethal, like, why should I even get attached to the character when it's just going to die, and that's definitely like a defensive kind of stance to take for something like this. But I think it's cheapening it. I think that this is a whole nother topic. Where let's rope this back to lying to player characters and subjective experience. But I think part of the accomplishment is overcoming real threats, real obstacles, and sometimes you get lucky and fucking headshot the big bad and they drop, and sometimes you get unlucky and everybody fucking dies. That's just it. The ups and downs are what make the thing exciting. But yeah,
I think I want to make, before we do move on, there is one point that adds to the fudging rules, though, that impacts the DM's impulses, I think, and that is with the source material. When you make your game whole cloth, and so every encounter is a creation of your own, I think that can create an environment where you can feel guilty as a DM for either making an encounter, for being off in your encounter design, and that can also breed the desire. So, like, I'm running an intro Fandelver for like the 5th time at the moment, and I feel very freed by having a module to go off of, because I don't have to worry about encounter balance. It's just written down. I'm just playing what somebody else wrote, and I feel like it's unnecessary. It's very easy to just say, "Nah, man, this is the way the game was designed. I'm rolling straight." But I could see where there would be like, "Oh shit, I've done that a lot in the past," where it's like, "Man, I just really screwed up this combat. So this was badly made. All right, so I'm going to help these guys out." Anywho.
Yeah, I get that, and that's something I'm absolved of by running all these classic modules. I can always just say, "Well, fucking blame Gary Gygax or whoever. It's not my problem." But the DM calls for all the rolls. That's how it should be. Player characters should never be calling for rolls to make, and so I think that the dice give you something to kind of shield yourself with as a DM from taking responsibility. It's bullshit to say, "All right, man, you're pissing me off, so your character dies of a heart attack," most of the time. But it's fine to say, "Okay, the aerial servant hits you for a huge amount of damage and you drop." That's it's the game that you're playing, and as a DM, don't call for rolls that you are going to want to fudge. If your players get themselves in a situation where they're dealing with lethal dice coming at them, then that was their choice. But don't call for a roll that you're gonna feel bad about later.
Can I jump us to a point that I really want to not miss? I really want to talk about when a particular player maybe multiple. I think it gets better when multiple players are in on the deception. But when you have a game when there's one person who knows a lot more either out of character information or has created a character that either the DM's in cahoots on that just knows some really important info and is an active deceiver in the party, kind of fueled by the DM to derail the party. I've experienced that where there's this information asymmetry amongst players, and it's worked out. I mean, it's been okay in certain situations because sometimes I think you can really, like if you have an introvert at the table, they can really get a lot out of the outside of the game interaction. If you've got a player who's like wanting to do things and like messaging you, and maybe they sit at the table and don't do much, but you realize they get a lot of fun out of like setting other things in motions behind the scenes. I've had that work out okay. But I've also been in games when, such and such's buddy comes in from out of town, or maybe this one guy is the best friend of the DM, and it just seems like that player's more important because they tend to have more info. Have you guys had that experience, and have you hated it as much as I have?
Yeah, it is kind of lame when there's favorites being played. But on the other hand, I do like having a secret traitor in the group somewhere. Like most things, you can't be one note with it if you're the type of DM that has a friend pop in, and every time you invite a new friend in to play with the group, it turns out that that's a traitor. Your group's not going to be very likely to let new NPCs into the group. But yeah, if it's some ongoing thing where the DM's bestie is some special case, that gets tiresome really quickly.
The other players need to have a way of accessing that same information, either by the DM making some hint that there is something that they can learn, or by making it that there is a completely different way that they can go about gaining that same information. I think if you are going to be putting that information down on one player to hold, players love holding secrets, especially from other players. And I have seen a lot of times a player given information and then just refusing to give that same information to the other player characters. And this could go as simple as a player says, I want to make a knowledge check to see if I know anything about X. And then the DM gives them the information in a way that is not shared with all the players at the table. And then the player just says, thank you, DM, and then says nothing to the other players. That is kind of a form of the deception that I wanted to talk about here. And I feel like that's a version of withholding information from the players, even though it is information that is getting to one particular player. It's not information that is coming out to the group just because of the way players often play at the table.
But that's out of the DM's hands, in my opinion.
Okay. What about another form of either with deception by omission or withholding information? If the player characters, Jordan, you made an allusion a little bit ago about like making a check for knowledge. And if the player doesn't know what they rolled and you just give them a piece of knowledge, you could potentially give them a bad piece of knowledge that then all of the player characters are acting on, a completely inaccurate piece of world knowledge, and they can act upon that. What about that as a way of deception? Do you feel that's a good way of doing it?
I do that all the time. And I think it's totally legit for a bunch of reasons. For one thing, I do secret rolls in our game, so nobody ever knows how stealthy they are, and nobody knows if they nailed that lore check or whatever. They're just going by whatever I report to them. So that gives you a lot of room to play around with stuff that the mechanics kind of don't. And I sort of organically do like a degrees of failure thing without getting like too into like systematizing it. I don't care if it's, 5 increments away from success or whatever. If somebody rolls, just 1 or 2 away from a success, I'll mix in some correct things and some fake things and whatever I'm telling you. I think that's fine. And if you just absolutely nail it, then I give you a whole bunch of good information, and I'll go way off if you fail way badly. The thing is, though, if we're trying to simulate playing in some kind of medieval setting where you've got multiple lost civilizations in the past, you've got all the world's knowledge is in some dusty tomes, and there's magic that has fucked things up. There's gods that may be trying to hide things or steer people a certain way or whatever. There's a million different vectors for knowledge to be lost in a setting like this, and that's before you even get to the different perspectives going on at the time of whatever kind of ancient thing you're trying to figure out. So yeah, I've had a lot of fun in our game. We're in Greyhawk, and there's a lot of history in Greyhawk, a lot of fallen civilizations, and I've been fucking around with the group uncovering things about the occluded empire of Vecna. Well, that's a great one to drop in somewhere, because his whole thing was misinformation. So it was almost like the way I interpret it is almost like a Bene Gesserit type of thing, where you got centuries and centuries during this empire of them creating misinformation, and then afterwards, these cults that are still perpetuating misinformation. It's a perfect mystery box to fuck with player characters for stuff like that. And I think that's right in line with how the game is supposed to be. The earliest modules have rumor tables, and you roll randomly to see what player characters can figure out about the Keep on the Borderlands, or the Caves of Chaos from the Keep on the Borderlands, or Into the Unknown has the same stuff for Quascatan, however you say that. Some things are right, some things are wrong. The player characters go in there and they should know, can't be sure. This is just what we have a hunch about. I think that's legit as fuck.
I have a very specific scenario I want to run by you, and after I present the scenario, I will let you know my thoughts on it. But the very specific scenario that came to my mind is you're playing a modern game. A player is a forensic scientist, and they take a blood sample from a murderer or from a murder or something, and they got to use this blood sample to find out who the murderer is. The player makes a secret roll to see how their forensic analysis goes, and they completely botch the roll. Would you then tell the player, oh, the blood type you got back is B, when in fact the blood type that if they had done it successfully was A? Is that the type of thing that you might do? I think that is pushing a little too far as giving out bad information on a failed check. I actually saw somebody do something very similar in an investigative game that I was a part of 20 years ago.
I hate running modern games where society is still intact for things like that, because science is hard to do well in a role-playing game, I think, especially when it's just modern, normal, not sci-fi science. I imagine it's probably pretty hard to fuck that up, that specific thing. So I don't know how I'd handle it. I'm not a fucking blood expert, but I don't know. Was that the only person working on it? I might give another player character a chance to roll and look over their shoulder and be like, bro, you fucked that up. I don't know.
That character was the only forensic scientist in the group.
I think it's in that situation, a DM could go a couple different ways. It seems a bit dickish to be, to just say you read the report wrong or whatever. But I could see some scenarios where you could slip it in. You could just say that instead of getting the wrong output, you just, oh man, you realize, you're getting a bunch of gibberish and you realize you spoiled your sample. It's like it comes back dog DNA and you're like, what? Oh shit, I forgot I pet my dog. And that kind of thing. Or you could just say, because you made an error, you tested the wrong sample. I mean, that could be, and that's something that later on the player could discover if somebody else were like looking over Jordan, like you were saying, looking over this shoulder. But I mean, yeah, everything Jordan just said, that's why I stick away from modern games, because it does kind of get away from you. Can't know everything in the real world for sure, but it's a little easier in a fictional made up world.
I also don't know if I'd even call for a roll for something like that. I'm a big fan of only rolling when it's like a big deal to fail or succeed. If the only thing on the line is some forward progress, then just by virtue of that person being a forensic scientist, I would say, okay, yeah, you know how to do this, so blah blah blah. You figure out it's type A or whatever it was supposed to be. I don't think every single exercise of a player's capability or a character's capabilities should come down to a dice roll necessarily.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw that little scenario out as a very concrete example of one extreme that this idea or that this concept could go to.
I still really like the idea, and I need to work that into live tabletop games now that I'm kind of getting the itch back to play live. I think that the DM, there's a really good argument to be made that the DM should make all knowledge and perception rolls and stealth rolls, I guess. Anytime that the outcome can go either way, that when like you just fail your roll and you see your dice roll and it's clearly low, that it really spoils it. A lot of those, I think that that's a great mechanic. I think that it adds a lot more than it takes away. I don't love taking all the dice rolls out of the player's hands, especially being live, but I don't think it's crazy to say, okay, guys, by the way, the following skills you have on your sheet, but just so you know, a lot of times I'm going to be rolling them behind the scenes, or I'm always going to be rolling them for you, just because, this is a real squishy skill, and there can be real life impacts if you screw it up, because I think you know what I mean.
What do you guys think about social roles like that? Like for my game, I don't have any deception or sense motive or intuition or any of those kinds of mechanics to roll at all. If you guys are talking to an NPC in my game, it's up to you to decide whether you think you can trust them or if they're telling you the whole truth or whatever. And it's up to me to convey that in whatever way I feel like that person or creature would. What do you guys think about that whole social mechanic side of these games and deception within those?
I will say that it is much harder in this current game than in previous games I've been in with you, Jordan, because we are not sitting around a table. I don't get to see your expressions and stuff. I'm having a much more difficult time identifying if somebody is trying to deceive us.
Yeah, I don't like that take 100%. I understand why you're going for it, and honestly, I think that if you're just not sure how to do it, I think just not rolling them at all is not a bad call for a DM. But this goes back to a bigger topic. You guys have probably done a podcast on it. I should go back and listen to it because it's vexed me in games in the past. Is like, at a certain point, we're not playing ourselves, and that includes physical and social traits. And so, like, I'm a pretty average dude, just kind of in general. And so when you have a very smart character, that's definitely smarter than the player character, and that applies socially as well. Like, you can, if you're playing a character that's very socially adept, which would make sense for an introvert or someone who's not socially adept, right? Because we're playing games, fiction. We want to be what we're not. You're not really giving anybody any, pathway to access that benefit. Like, I'm not a very charismatic person, but this character is. So there should be some way for them to boost those moments with something, if not a dice roll, then something mechanical to just honor the character that's not the player,
Well, hang on. I was talking one way here. Like characters, I use reaction rolls. And so if a character has a high charisma or something, that's going to reflect in the way that people interact with them for sure. What I'm talking about is that people are not given a dice mechanic to just have a built-in lie detector, or for that matter, a roll just to tell a convincing lie.
I think it can be accomplished simply by the behind the dice, saying I'm rolling your socials I'm rolling your socials, and that's going to affect. But I like the idea of the interaction too. Just basing how much an NPC might divulge based, depending on how much they trust or whatever. I think that gets you there too.
I don't think I have ever played in a game with a DM who basically had an NPC lie, who didn't then either consciously or subconsciously exaggerate one of the common lying tells.
Oh, nice. That's interesting. Do I do that?
A little. I don't want to give you more information than that, though.
I tried to do that last game I ran in person. It was written into the module where one of the NPCs was a willing traitor, and I ran him as such. And I didn't didn't even offer to my players to do anything. They didn't ask either. But to use a social role, I just lied to them. But it wasn't a whole lie. That's the thing, though. It's like, when you're dealing with deceptive NPCs, an NPC who's on the evil side of things, who's willing to be deceptive in the player's party to the player's favor to a certain extent. I mean, they're not going to tell the whole truth. And this guy in this particular case, yeah, he was 100% willing to sell out the bad guys or his compatriots, but he wasn't going to stick around. So they concocted this big old plan, and they were just assuming that the dude would help. And then when this shit hit the fan, he didn't stick around. He ran his ass off. I don't know if that counts, but yeah, I didn't even really. I just kind of told them what they wanted to hear. I don't think I gave them any tells. I might have, though.
I try to make it kind of a dynamic thing. Like, if you guys decide to, like last session, for instance, you guys came across a group of orcs that were, part of a barracks in the Tomb of the Vampire Queen. I fully expected you all to just storm in and kill all of them. To my surprise, you guys decided to take 2 of them prisoner, which is fine. And then you wanted to interrogate them. Well, I've got basic orc stats, but I wanted to, have a little bit more dynamism to it. So I took a second and rolled up the 3 mental and social stats in Wisdom Charisma for those guys to see, what kind of orcs are you dealing with. And I've done that before with you guys captured a goblin or something somewhere. I think it was Dungeon of the Crown Goblins, but I try to give you guys a chance to occasionally come across some idiot that's going to spill the beans, or occasionally come across, some sly operator that's going to manipulate you or something. But I just let the dice rolls for those stats dictate how I try to convey that. Now, if I have, my own tells and things like that, there's nothing I can do about that. But by the same token, it's not like if I was using a deception skill and I, rolled a crit for my goblin, I can possibly be like, well, you have to believe what he's saying. Like, you absolutely believe that this is what's going on. Like, that's not going to work.
I'm really interested to hit this topic too. We're getting a bit long, and it feels like it came from something you've experienced, Clayton. Have you had an issue with players withholding information or lying to the DM? It seems like, how would something like that get? I can imagine, but I'd like to hear a specific.
Okay, I could give a very specific, because I've encountered this many times. We are playing with a DM who the players do not trust. This is a huge caveat. This is the only time I've ever seen this happen. The players come up with a plan that they think will defeat the scenario that the DM is presenting them. The players will start to enact the plan without, and whenever the DM asks them to explain why they're doing or what the motivation for doing it, the players do not give any information to the DM, because we know that the DM, as soon as the DM knows our plan, they will come up with some way to fuck it up. They'll come up with some sort of excuse why it doesn't work the way it is intended to work. And the DM will just make it not just more difficult, will make it so that the plan has to fail because they didn't think of it. It's entirely a scenario where the DM comes up with the way that something will be defeated, and then the players come up with a better idea.
I think the best way to deceive that guy is to tell him that you're coming to his game and then not show up.
I don't think the players have any obligation to tell the DM what they're planning if it's like something that's going on in that session. If it's like, where are you guys going to, which way are you guys going to go for next session so I can have something prepped, that's one thing. But if the group wants to hatch some like, secret strategy against the big bad that they're going to fight that session or something, I think that's legit. I'd probably appreciate that from my players so that I wouldn't do some unconscious bias kind of shit like that, because it's really hard when you have nearly omniscient knowledge to stay in perspective of the limited view of what the enemy actually is aware of about the party.
If my players like started direct messaging or texting, I've done a little bit of that in your game, Jordan. Nothing too crazy, but if my players started whipping out their phones at a table and like texting each other because they didn't want me to know what they were thinking, I would actually feel like I leveled up as a DM. I would be very flattered, I think.
Yeah, agreed.
I take it as a sign that the players have lost trust in the DM, but that's just because of my bad early gaming experience.
I gotcha. That scenario you described, Clayton, would be horrible. I would be total metagaming in that point and like trying to figure out a way to get somebody else. If we just couldn't afford to lose a player in our group, I would be doing whatever I could to get somebody else to be the DM. Hey man, you need a break. How about Johnny's been working on a game?
It's entirely a scenario where it's a game where it's the DM versus the players.
I think the only honesty that players owe the DM is what their character is actually doing, stuff that their character actually has, and things that your character has actually already done. Those three things, I think you absolutely have to tell the DM the truth if they ask you about that, because it's things they need to know to run the game. But any future plans or anything, it's your own business. That's what I think.
There is a common, and I don't know if this falls under the umbrella of deception, but I've encountered it enough time. This might be a good place to touch on it. It's not going to be much, but I've played with DMs, and I'll just point at you, Jordan, as the example. It's the only one I can really think of, and it's inevitable. So anybody who runs theater of the mind is going to have this experience. But the one that's popping in my mind was in a game you ran a long time ago. But anyway, it's when you're playing without figs, or even if you are, but whatever. When players lose track of the reality of the situation, maybe this relates to that Rashomon effect you guys were talking about a little bit earlier before off pod. But like, I've definitely been in games when, due to the description of the events and maybe lack of many visual supports, players just totally lose connection with what the DM's describing, and that's a real common accidental, I guess, form of deception that can affect a game. Is the moral of the story just use figs as often as possible, or use a visual medium as often as possible, or have you guys ran into that?
God, no. I love theater of the mind for that very reasons, because some people will perceive things differently. I think that the situation you're getting into is kind of falls into an issue of whether it's the DM or the player. Somebody is either not paying attention or failing to maintain the attention of the players at the table. In those types of situations, they do lead to Rashomon effects, where and to describe what the Rashomon effect is, when I say the Rashomon effect, what I mean is whenever there are multiple people who experience the same events, but in the telling, each person's version of events is different. It's based on the Akira Kurosawa movie from the 1950s, I think. And this is something that happens in the real world, with particularly in court cases with eyewitness testimony. Several eyewitnesses will see the same thing happen, and they may describe wildly different versions of events. And so that is a form of, it's not even an active form of deception. It's just a people not having complete or accurate information to begin with. So I feel like in Eliot, in your example, where I said before that it's partial, it might be because the DM hasn't been able to maintain the attention and focus of the players at the table. It might be because the player, for some reason, has lost focus and just completely lost what was happening. If I were DMing in that situation, I would let most of it fly. But if there was a crucial piece of information that, like literally all of the players at the table completely didn't have, I would be more lenient on that. I might call for like a knowledge roll or something to, for the players to remember and then give them more accurate information if they succeeded the roll. That's how I've run similar situations in the past.
I do something like that. If somebody would tell you guys a lie about something and you knew firsthand, like had like conflicting information, I would try to remind people that, that's not what this other thing indicated, or, this rune contradicts this other rune or hieroglyph or whatever the fuck you're looking at. I don't expect players to remember everything that their characters should know.
Yeah, especially when sometimes it's something that your characters experienced literally 20 minutes ago, but you in real time had experienced it a month ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm glad to hear you guys say that, because I'm finding myself to get a taste of my own medicine, because I'm a bad note taker and I'm often the guy that needs correction. But, with a party of new players who are kind of new to D&D, sometimes they don't always take the advice of like, you should jot down something, like the name of the most important NPC. And I definitely had that moment last game when the players were in character, in a moment in character. They were trying to reference a particular NPC. And they're like, what was it? I don't remember his name. And they looked at me. I'm like, just shrugged my shoulders. And they got mad at me. Maybe I should be a little less hard ass in the future.
Yeah, asking an NPC's name, I will usually give that if it is something that I as the DM remember. If it's something that I as the DM do not remember and I don't have it written in my notes, that's kind of a hint that that was an NPC created on the spot for whatever the player character's needs were at the time.
Legit. What do you guys think about rumor tables? I don't know if they still exist in modern modules. I try not to look at new stuff that Wizards puts out. From what I can tell, it's mostly shit. I don't know if rumor tables are out of fashion or not in official D&D publications, but they're all over the place in old stuff, and they're kind of fun to read. What do you guys think about playing them? You're going to play through some. I'm just curious what your thoughts are, just out of the box.
Absolutely love them.
Yeah, it adds depth. It's a sign of a experienced DM, because you're usually, and I'm guilty of this, you juggle so much stuff in the air, and sometimes, like, I think I'm prone to just letting the story be pretty straightforward, and but I mean, like we were kind of with the Rashomon effect, it's like it is realistic that, if you're getting secondhand information, it's probably not completely accurate, especially in a fantasy world when, you know what I mean, when there's like illiteracy and stuff. So having rumors that may or may not be true would just add for realism.
And it's not just an indication of the level of the DM. It's also an indication of whether or not the DM has put any thought to the world beyond the most immediate adventure that the player character is on. It's a sign that the DM has done their legwork to make the world a more lived-in world, a more believable world.
That's a good point. I totally agree with that. It makes it feel like there was stuff going on there before the player characters arrived, that all of this is not just some like old west town that suddenly got like popped up like a old movie set right there for the characters to have their scene.
Yeah, and it's also fun, like an example I perpetuated against my players, or I've confused the terms again, perpetrated against my players. That's the second time this episode. The player characters were doing an adventure and people were turning to stone and they heard that there was a Medusa in the area. Well, there wasn't in fact a Medusa. There was a basilisk in the area. Both creatures turned things to stone. So throwing the player characters for a loop like that can be a lot of fun.
I hope to do that one day.
Yeah, there's surprisingly a large number of creatures that in mythology or in game books can turn things into stone. So just because the player characters immediately think one thing doesn't necessarily have to be that one thing.
Yeah, a giant that lives in the woods could just be like a really tall half-orc, or like maybe just a hobgoblin or something.
The rumors and stuff kind of fall into the area where I see it as more of a particular character or a particular NPC not having accurate information and passing that along to the players. I don't really consider that to be the DM lying to the players, but that's probably just because of my lived experience in gaming. What's your what if?
Well, what about the big bad, just as part of their overall strategy, intentionally sowing false rumors to throw the player characters off the trail? How do you feel about that?
There needs to be a way in which the player characters can get the actual information. And I as a player would not like it if we were told that the big bad has this one weakness and we go through significant adventure in order to exploit that weakness, and then the bad guy just laughing at us and saying he's fine. Like for instance, actually I can't think of a good for instance.
Well, it would be like if in the Strahd game you retconned that like all the relics that the players go to gather are all just planted fake, and then gave him, made them immune to those things. Obviously that'd be horrible as a DM, but that would be an example. Or if some of the relics were just fake relics that knowing that he had weaknesses out there, he sowed the seeds of others just to throw people off. That might be a good way to do that.
Now, if we got to like in the example Strahd, and we learned that all of these things were a deception, and then the DM informed the players of all the other hints that were dropped that you missed along the way, that might be a mitigating circumstance where I would be okay with it. If there was a legit attempt by the DM to not only deceive the players, but also let them know that they were being deceived, I would be much more okay with it.
Interesting.
I don't know. I don't know. In that scenario, I would still probably be pretty salty because I don't know. That's like basically that's just your DM coming up. Well, guys, you're all very stupid, and I gave you a lot of hints. So because you're really stupid, I'm going to kill you now. But I mean, isn't that kind of the truth?
There are some movies that pull off the twist ending because when you get to the twist ending, you think back and you're like, I missed all of these things that I was shown. But then there are other movies with twist endings that's just stupid because they didn't show you anything and just expected, like they just threw something at you that had no foreshadowing and no identifying markers that you were being tricked or you were being deceived.
I think in game of like, what if you tried to pull off a similar coup as to like in Dune, whenever as the reader in Dune, pretty early on that Dr. Yui is leading them into their doom. But if you were a player in a game with a scenario like that, you would just get walloped out of nowhere. And depending on how you ran that, it could feel pretty trash.
With what I said earlier about I haven't seen a DM actually try this without doing some sort of an exaggerated thing to indicate that there was a deception being done. I have had NPCs that have just betrayed the party like that, but there's always signs that I've been lucky enough to have DMs who have given indications that something ain't right here.
I think players should be more suspicious, generally speaking. I hear what you guys are saying, and I agree that there should be some way to figure out the truth and all. but I think there's also a good bit of investigative responsibility on the player's part to not just assume that what's being handed to you is like the vanilla adventure hook, then everything's going to go according to, the objective bullet points that are clearly laid out for you. Like, it's a very video gamey kind of way of approaching the stuff. And I think getting into interesting twists and nuances and perspectives and stuff is one of the strengths of this form of game over, video games. There's just so much dynamic stuff you can do playing at the edges of perception with things like this, that I think player characters should be much more proactive in confirming things that they just hear or think they've discovered or whatever.
So you're saying we should do a little, so whenever we hear that there's a vampire keep off in the wilderness, we should do more due diligence about who and what this is, besides just arming up and going on a walk?
Some in some of these early modules, I'll just straight up tell you, there are rumors that you could randomly be told that very well might get someone killed if you just assume that everything you hear is correct. And I read that as the rumor table and things associated with that are part of the hazard of the dungeon. The unknown can kill you, and your false assumptions can get you killed. So it's like a social trap, and I think it's something that people should be as aware of when playing the game as they are, poison needle coming out of the treasure chest lock or whatever.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think we're starting to get a little bit long. Are there any other points that we want to make sure that we hit before we move on?
We didn't get into kind of the mystical stuff at all, the illusions, hallucinations, prophecies, and things like that. If we're not too long, could we spend a second kicking some of that stuff around if you guys want to?
Sure.
So this came up in our game recently. You guys had the opportunity to speak to an oracle, properly pronounce it. And I spent some time putting together prophecies for each one of your characters that were like specific to your characters if you chose to get a prophetic reading from this person. Of course, they're super cryptic and weird, but it's one of those things that I hope for people that bother to record it and go back later and look at stuff will be like, oh man, this was like foreshadowed here, like you were talking about, Clayton. But prophecies are super hard to do, and that could probably be their own kind of its own topic for an episode, I think, because it fucks with time and like free will and all that kind of stuff. But have you guys ever tried to pull off prophecy, and has that affected your group's decision making in any way?
Boy, have I ever tried to use prophecy. I've had several campaigns that revolved around prophecy. In my experience, the only times it really works is either the prophecy is that the player characters will do a great thing and stop whatever bad thing is about to happen to the world, or the majority of the aspects of the prophecy are things that are happening beyond the player character's control, like natural disasters type things. It gets to where the player characters may decide, well, just fuck this prophecy if it's something that they themselves have to do. But like what you're saying, there's things going on in the world. It's a lot easier to put those elements into prophecy where the player characters either have to interact with it in some way.
They're tough. Yeah, I can't. There was a time. I think there was a game I ran. I definitely have played in a game when you've been the chosen ones or whatever. But that's just beware, avoid, do not do. Because then they just go ham or whatever. I mean, the players could die. It's just fucked. I could see prophecies where, if you've got your storyline worked out well enough to where you can, there's going to be, like you were saying, a natural disaster or maybe like reveal, like you could reveal like the look of a location where a bad guy could potentially be, something like that, more like a scry kind of information for free. I think that's the way to go, but tread carefully with prophecies, because so much of the inspiration literature that people want to emulate involves them, the chosen one hero path, right? I mean, so many of them are you're the chosen one or whatever, and you kind of want to do that.
Right, and you're tempted to force things to happen, and just kind of invalidates player agency and stuff. It's tough. I'm using it to try to build some tension towards some stuff that might be unfolding later. But I don't know. On the other hand, sometimes they're so vague that people just ignore them completely, which is what I think happened when I tried it. So it's hard. What about illusions? There's a interesting thing about illusion magic in first edition D&D, and that is that if you believe the illusion is real, it will damage you in the same way as if it were real. And a lot of old school players will go around actively trying to disbelieve in stuff that they think is an illusion in order to provoke a saving throw to see through the thing. You guys fuck with illusions much? What do you think?
I almost never throw illusions at player characters except for a spell being cast by an enemy wizard. That's about the only time I really interact with it.
Same.
But with those spells, when you guys run those things, if somebody creates if an enemy is trying to run away and they create an illusory wall of fire in the corridor to allow them to get out, and the player characters decide that they're going to run through it, do they take damage? How do you run that? Does it just disappear, revealed to be a hologram?
The way I would run that is that the player who runs through it, I would let them know that they don't actually take damage, but I might deceive the other players who haven't done that. I might slip the player character a secret message or something saying that you don't take damage, but I will actually say, I will roll dice and say, okay, that's 26 fire or something like that.
I would just default to what the spell says. If it, and if it doesn't say anything to it, then I don't know. I don't really know what I would do in that situation. Probably just have them think they're on fire and bluff even the main character. Like if they fail the save to see through the illusion, they jump through a wall of fire. I probably wouldn't make them take damage, but I'd probably make them think they did, and then have them fall on the ground writhing. I don't know. But that's just off the top of my head.
Back in the day, it was like the Matrix. If you believed it, then you're gonna die from it. And the illusionist was its whole own class. It's like a subclass of the magic user. So a high level illusionist could essentially create an entire realm around them that looked and acted however they wanted to. And that's one of those places where literally every single thing that the players that the player characters are perceiving or something that that NPC is just kind of dreaming up and fucking with them to believe in. The whole hallucinatory terrain and those kinds of spells are all about just you really can't trust a single thing that you're perceiving in your environment. You just have to figure it out somehow.
Yeah, I've used hallucinatory terrain to basically hide pits and stuff like that. So in that instance, it's it's still under the purview of the pit trap where they get a save to avoid it. I don't know if that's even really any different.
No way. If they get the same save to avoid the hidden pit trap as they would from just a regular pit trap, and why do you even bother casting a spell?
I'm just thinking about one of the first time I ever used an illusory pit trap. The player it was to cover up a pit, and the player got a check just like any other player to see whether or not they fell into it. I gave them the check to jump back, but at the time, I didn't put any thought as to why they would have jumped back, what it looked like then. I didn't have the player character just put their foot where there wasn't actually floor and then just fall forward because there was no indication that there was anything there.
Well, I think we've pretty much hit all of our topics. Anything else?
I'm ready for geek things if you are. I'll go ahead and go first. I discovered a neat little YouTube channel called Bite-Sized Nightmares. This guy takes people's descriptions of their nightmares and turns them into short videos. Most of them are around 3 to 5 minutes long. They're very creepy. They're fun things to watch at night when there's no lights on in the house and you get to experience other people's nightmares while you are awake. I don't remember the guy who was doing it, but he very recently made a feature length. I guess it's a movie. It's kind of a movie, kind of like an experimental art thing. But it is called Skinamarink. That just came out. I don't have any of the streaming platforms that it is on, so I have not watched it yet. But if you like to be scared, I would recommend watching Bite-Sized Nightmares.
That sounds awesome.
I've been super busy. I didn't actually come in super prepared. I've got a couple things. I'm gonna settle on the complete fiction of H.P. Lovecraft. I did pay for it, which is weird because it's in the public domain, and I'm sure if you get on like LibriVox or one of these other open whatever public domain audiobook service, you'll find them. But it just cost me one Audible credit. I'm not sure how much it would pay cash, but since most of his work, or I think all of his work, is now in the public domain, they've made a sweet audiobook, one file, one purchase, and it's everything that they've got on audio. I believe it's everything he ever wrote that's in audio book, proper, well-made audiobooks, and it's just a nice investment. I have only scratched the surface because it's huge, but it's just nice to know that anytime I take the notion, I can go listen to Call of Cthulhu or whatever I want to listen to that's H.P. Lovecraft. So there you go. Go pick it up if you got a spare Audible credit.
Nice.
Is that all the same narrator, or are there different narrators?
It was made by a group. So far it's been the same narrator, but it may have multiple. So far there's only one, and it's well done.
I would highly recommend people watch Last of Us on HBO. It's great. It's just absolutely fucking great. I can't say a bad thing about it, honestly. I played the first game. I never played the second game. I absolutely adored the first game. It's surprisingly true to the first game. The things that they added are fine. I don't have any major complaints about any of the artistic license that they've taken. But yeah, just as far as like the tension, the mood of the thing, the look, the overall quality, the writing has been pretty solid. The acting has been pretty solid. Yeah, I don't have one single bad thing to say about it, honestly. Nothing of any real substance. I could nitpick anything, but it's well worth your time. You could do a whole lot worse on streaming television these days than Last of Us.
Pedro Pascal just hitting home runs.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, guys, what do you say we stop this bullshit and start rolling some dice?
As long as my power don't go out.
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.